Hey guys, welcome back to the Fanfic Reread Project. In this episode, we will be continuing our reread of the original version of Lego Story. As I said last episode, in this episode we will be continuing Chapter 2, but this time we will be going back to the original version of Chapter 2. Just to catch you up on what's happened so far, because as I said, the beginning of the other chapter doesn't actually go with this. It's a completely different version of the chapter. So Clint and Natasha, after the events of Dr. Octopus stealing the cosmic brick from Reed Richards and having the big fight in Times Square, Natasha and Clint show up on the scene. They send Steve and Reed back to the helicarrier and they go to Oscorp. Instead of in the last chapter where they kind of went in a side entrance and were being a little bit sneaky about it, they just walked in the front door. But Natasha used her same, gadget to get them in without setting off the alarm or whatever. Like I said, that's a scene that's pulled directly from the game, and it inspired the later scene, but I thought it didn't make a lot of sense for there to be a sensor over the front door. However, they get inside. I forget exactly what happens, but essentially, Spider-Man is there. The Green Goblin shows up and he's like, yeah, and then he flies off. So they have to try and follow him. They hit a bunch of roadblocks in the forms of just walls dropping down in front of them and trapping them in small spaces. This is important to know because it's actually a running gag and it shows up a few times in this, but they manage to pass all of these roadblocks. They fight their way through Oscorp fighters, some of whom are disguised as scientists, and they finally reach the Green Goblin. So they're about to confront him, and they're like, "Where's the brick?" And he's like, I won't tell. And he pushes a button, and they fall down a trap door and land in the basement. So this is basically where the chapter picks up at. So this is right after Green Goblin pushes the button and drops them down the thing. So let's jump in. Getting a visitor's pass around here is grueling, Clint said. He helped Natasha to her feet while Spider-Man just lay back on the floor and started groaning. I would ask you if you knew where we were going, but it looks like you're having an episode. I don't know, Spider-Man sighed, sitting back up. That guy is maniacal, Natasha muttered, shaking her head. You have no idea. So that I'd ask you if you know where we're going line is actually a reference to a SpongeBob episode. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's the one where Patrick's parents are coming over, and then it turns out at the end that the people he'd been entertaining weren't even his parents. And I think he's cleaning and stuff, and SpongeBob walks in and it's I was going to ask you if you wanted to go jellyfishing or whatever, but it looks like you're having an episode. But anyway, Spider-Man got back on his feet when the elevator came to a stop. The floor fell from under them again, and they went plummeting down a large air duct. They were deposited messily at the bottom, in between the shuddering walls of a large trash compactor. Natasha massaged the back of her neck as she got to her feet once again. All that falling had her sore. The compactor was on a platform that, when she looked over the railing, seemed to be 20 or 30 feet above water. A ladder behind her led up to the rest of the large, dimly lit space. "Do you know what this is?" she asked Spider-Man. "Is it basement, maybe?" He shook his head. "I've never been in this part of the building." "The brick is going to have to wait," she declared. "We need to get out of here." "And how do we do that?" asked Clint. "Up," Spider-Man answered. "I think we should worry about getting back upstairs." They climbed the ladder and came up on a strangely empty factory floor. A lot of the machinery was running, the mechanical sounds echoing off the walls, but there weren't any workers there. A door all the way to the side of the room seemed to be malfunctioning. Every time the doors tried to slide open, they were abruptly pulled closed again by black tentacles. I like that that's actually a question. The inner monologue is what? That's great. "I think there's been a breakout," Spider-Man said warily. "Break out?" Clint repeated. "Yeah," he answered with a nod. "We should get out of here." So, one thing you'll note if you've played Lego Marvel Superheroes and you remember what the design of the third level looks like, the interiors in Oscorp are a lot closer to what was shown in the game here than they were in the last one. The one room I do remember distinctly existing in the game that appeared in the last version of this chapter was the big room with the two tanks on either side and the door that was closed shut by Venom, supposedly. That room and then the room where they walk past all the cages, those are in the game, and those show up here as well. But the rest of the stuff is very different as far as we have any description of it. This, on the other hand, like down to the actual little like things lying around and the placement of actual objects, it is very similar. They followed him toward the back wall, where a broken Oscorp sign hung from the balcony. There was a ladder on the wall behind it, but it was blocked as well by some very tall crates. One of the two had to go, but there was no way they were moving those huge things. They didn't even have to axe this time. The sign erupted in a shower of sparks. In the game, Clint has explosive... Well, in the comics. But in general, Clint has explosive arrows, so throughout this chapter, he had been using his explosive arrows to blow up things that were in their way, or in the case of 2 separate times, he had to blow up a piece of machinery so they could get out of a tight space or something like that. But anyway, Spider-Man jumped up on the crate and then helped Natasha and Clint up. From there, they could see up to the trapdoor in the ceiling. So right away, even though it's not drastically different, this feels a lot more wordy than the chapter that we read last episode. My mouth keeps like seeing all of these extra words and just like going it's kind of ridiculous, but anyway. They came up into a lab, which was a lot like the ones they'd seen before. It was even separated from the adjacent hall by a glass wall. It was completely empty, though, and sparsely lit by the ceiling lights. The glowing logo on the wall flickered on and off weakly. "Where is everyone?" Natasha asked. The labs on the other side of the hall were empty, too. So that was a reference back to another place where they got trapped earlier in the chapter, because, Jesus. Spider-Man put up a hand. "Wait for me." He jumped up on the ceiling, ripped off the caution tape that was covering the doorway, and then quietly disappeared into the other room. He dropped to the floor and then beckoned them in after him, but stopped them as soon as they stepped through the door. Jesus Christ, that sentence is just, ugh. Natasha was a little taken aback by the sight. They'd entered into a large corridor dripping with what looked like black goo. Big strands of it stretched from the ceiling to the floor and overflowed from the vents on the wall. It had pulled up in the corners where it moved ever so slightly, almost like it was breathing. It even covered the lights, making it darker than it should have been. I can definitely see a few things that I carried over into the edit here. "Venom," Spider-Man muttered. "What's Venom?" Clint asked. "Who?" Spider-Man corrected. "He's one of the symbiotes Oscorp's got boxed up in here. It's not the worst of them, but it's still terrible, even without the host." Why did he change pronouns? Anyway, "This is all from that thing?" Natasha asked. He nodded. "It sure knows how to make a mess. I know this part of the building, and there are some doors up ahead, but I'm willing to bet that most of them are going to be blocked off." There was a low growling sound, and then a shadow scrambled over the walls toward the next room. "You know, I'm starting to rethink what I said before about that breakout. This is exactly what Osborn wants." They crept down the hall cautiously, Clint and Natasha with weapons in hand, until they entered the large room buffered by huge cages with lit floors. A large archway led to another hall, but as soon as they glanced at it, a metal door slammed down, pulled by those same black tentacles. "Again with the doors," Clint said with a sigh. "If we find some way to open it, he'll just close it again, won't he?" "Not if we're quick about it," Spider-Man countered. "Venom hates loud noises and fire. If we can burn him out or turn on an alarm or something, we can get rid of him long enough to get through." "And if we can't do that?" Clint asked. "We'll just have to do it the old-fashioned way," Natasha said. "If you can get me to a computer, I can hack the security system and force the door open." "Oh, we don't even have to go through all that," Spider-Man told her. "If we cut off the power, all the doors will be forced open anyway." Clint raised an eyebrow. "How do you know that?" "One time the power got cut off and it forced all the doors open." Natasha smirked. "Okay then, how do we turn the power off?" The generator room the generator room is right through there." He pointed down a smaller hall lined with more of those cages. Even from there she could see the variously colored puddles of slime shifting behind the glass. The empty one was especially prominent. "Of course it is," Natasha responded. That laugh had left her voice. "That's a hell of a security measure." Spider-Man shrugged. "No kill like overkill. They're sturdy cages. They won't get out unless someone lets them out. And as you can see, one is enough. Come on." One thing I'm definitely noticing is that there is a lot more dialogue in this version. The characters talk through, it seems like, every single situation. Good lord. Pretty sure this is consistent throughout the story, but I guess it is definitely a valid way of getting across information instead of having it dumped on you, but it is interesting just how much the characters talk. Like, they comment on everything, you know? One thing I will say about this is that I actually like the way that Venom's weaknesses are introduced in this a little bit better than they were in the newer version. Because in that one, Clint just, like, asks and Spider-Man tells them. Here, it kind of comes up naturally in the conversation where it's like, Okay, but how do we get out? And he's like, oh, if we do this and this, then the thing happens, you know? Instead of it being part of a conversation about like what venom even is. Again, like I said, it makes sense. It just felt weird to me, but here it didn't bother me as much. Anyway, let's move on. If Osborn's intentions were to scare anyone out of trying to do what they were about to do, he definitely had the right idea. As Spider-Man led them down the hall, the amorphous-colored blobs of muck rippled unnaturally, some rising in the lumps with eye-like white spots. A pool of yellowish slime gained a mouth and left a trail of saliva on the glass with its tongue. It was definitely unnerving her. Venom closed the door on a large blue containment unit as soon as they stepped into the next room. There was a pained whine from behind it when it slammed down loudly. I'm guessing that was the eponymous generator, Clint said. Yeah, but we're not here for that. There was a growl from behind the metal shutter, and Spider-Man lowered his voice. What we want is up there. He physically took their heads and repositioned them so that they were looking at a panel on the wall above another large metal container in the corner. God, every sentence feels so long. It's like I'm having flashbacks to Batman, where it had that same problem. Every sentence felt so long, but the writing style sounds different. So it's like the sensation, it's like deja vu. It's like I've been here before, but there's no way I could have because it's different. Jesus. I see you, she said to him. She deployed the widow's line and swung herself up there. Spider-Man picked up Clint and brought him up there after her. When she stepped forward, away from the edge, the metal bowed slightly under her feet. You might want to stay back there, she said to Clint. What's that supposed to mean? He said back. She rolled her eyes. Wow. So one thing that the other story didn't introduce to us is the widow's line, which is basically a grappling hook sort of thing that Natasha uses. It's not actually featured in the game at all, but I decided to bring it in here for reasons. One thing I will say about the last chapter is that it did adequately introduce us to the gadgets on Natasha's gauntlets, which is really important when reading this chapter, because if that's not introduced earlier, her using them kind of comes out of nowhere. And she uses them a lot in this version of the chapter, as you're about to see. So let's get back to this. Natasha treaded carefully toward the wall and started to turn on the magnets on her gloves, but she realized that the panel was made of plastic instead and screwed in at the corners. She could easily melt through the panel cover. Her gauntlets had a setting for that, and a bit more, but the smell of melting plastic might attract venom. Problem? Spider-Man asked. She looked up and found him on the wall above her. Not at all. She went with the magnets anyway and spent the time undoing each screw before pulling the panel off of the wall. The controls behind it were deceptively simple at first. Switches were next to large labels that indicated what each of them turned on and off, but there were also buttons in various sizes and colors too, and glowing lights. One wrong move and she might unveil some secret door that would lock them in there with that thing. I have an idea about this thing, but I don't want to screw us over, she said up to Spider-Man. She pointed to a blue button next to a plastic lever of the same shade. Does that actually connect to that generator, or is it like that to mess with us? No, it does, he said. I'll be honest though, I don't know whether you push the button or pull the lever. She tilted her head to the side slightly and he shrugged. I wasn't the one who turned off the power that time. Oh my god. They're gonna talk about it. Every single situation they do this. One thing I will say about this story, that it actually has a lot in common with Batman, except that its chapters are like way longer. But it's similar in the way that the character thinks through every single little thing that they're about to do. The Hunger Games did this as well, but it was different. There's actually an even better example of this later on, I think in chapter 5. Wait a minute. Clint inched a bit forward and Natasha moved over slightly so he could see it. Oh my god, that looks really familiar. It's both. Lever first. I swear I've seen that before somewhere. That was actually a Jurassic Park reference, supposedly. I said it was, but looking back on it, I don't see the reference at all. I think it's supposed to be a reference to that scene where Ellie Sattler has to go down to that bunker that has like the controls for the electricity on the island and put them back on. And I think I remember her doing some levers and buttons and stuff like that, but that's so vague. I don't really understand how that counts as a reference, but anyway, that worked for her. She pushed the lever up and then there was a rumble as the door of the container opened again. There was a loud hiss as black tentacles started to crawl their way out. Natasha pushed the button hurriedly and then the room went pitch black. All of the machines whirred to a halt, and there were growls and hisses from the ground below them. The backup generators kicked on with a low hum, and then the lights backing the cells returned. Those backups aren't going to mess us up, are they? Clint asked. Spider-Man shook his head. Good. Let's get out of here. Spider-Man ran ahead and jumped onto the ceiling, with Clint and Natasha sneaking along behind him. The black goo had turned stringy and was roiling as it slid in the same direction they were going. Spider-Man swung back into the room with the two cages, but before they could join him, the slime on the floor suddenly fused together and rose into a tall humanoid shape, covered in what looked like hulking muscles. "Oh, shoot," she heard Spider-Man say behind it. Clint instinctively pulled out an arrow and shot at it. The thing lodged right into its shoulder, but Venom didn't even flinch. It simply pulled the thing back out and then snapped it between its fingers. Spider-Man's words echoed in the back of her head as Venom's mouth pulled back into a growl, revealing its long, sharp teeth. Sound and heat, sound and heat. She had the latter, but not the former. But then it hit her. No, she did have both. Natasha whipped out her pistol and shot at it. Venom let out a roar as it began to bubble and slosh back to the ground, and the other symbiotes let out howls and ear-splitting shrieks. She didn't even stop to talk. She just pulled Clint along behind her as she sped off for the door. Number one, wouldn't that have hurt their ears? Number two, it is interesting that in this story, Natasha realizes, like, sound and heat, oh, a gun. But in the other story, when the situation is put in reverse, the characters kind of don't put two and two together, that maybe something to do with the gun hurts Venom, and they have to ask Spider-Man why, or what gets to him, quote unquote. It's just interesting how the two scenes are portrayed, because they're basically the same thing. And also they happen at very different times, but anyway. Venom was scrambling desperately to pull the door back down as they slid across the threshold. Clint shouldered into another one at the end of the hall as the stuff came pouring down it after them, and then he turned and forced it shut again. The liquid-filled tanks on the wall shuddered as Venom tried to force its way in with them. "It's going to remember the vents sooner or later," Natasha said quietly, so she couldn't remind it herself. "He can only stretch so far," Spider-Man told her. "We just had to get out of his reach." He tried off when he realized that the banging had stopped. "I'm already working on it." Clint had an arrow in place and fired toward a panel on the ceiling with a large metal latch over it. The trapdoor swung open, half missing because of the detonation, to reveal a ladder, the rungs of which were quickly becoming covered with goo. "The ladder is blocked," she told them. "Well, hold on, Merida, we're going up." He grabbed Clint around the waist and fired a web into the passage, and the two of them went flying up. Natasha followed suit on her widow's line. She saw Clint and Spider-Man vanish into the room above, but before she could reach them, she felt something grab her around the ankle, and she jerked to a stop. "Nat?" she heard Clint's voice echo down. Oh no. There was a black tentacle crawling its way up her leg, followed by another and another, until a bubbling black mass was forming beneath her. She tried to pull herself up, but she wouldn't budge. Then he started to pull her down. Clint's head appeared over the side of the exit, peering down at her. "Nat! I'm coming!" she said back up to him. A mouth appeared in the mass, and then the rest of Venom's head started to form out of it, leering at her as it pulled her down more. She tried to kick him off, but after she successfully freed a leg, he just grabbed it again. She was forced to pull the line back so he couldn't break it. The muck started crawling toward her waist like it was going to engulf her. She reached for her gauntlets. "Get off of me!" The hexagons appeared over her gloves this time, but instead of blue, they were bright red. She pressed her hands right into Venom's face, and there was a high-pitched wail, and the mass let go of her all at once, and began to slither off the walls. She switched to the magnets with her teeth and flew into the ladder. She turned them off again quickly and scrambled the rest of the way up into an abandoned lab. "Are you okay?" Clint asked her. "I told you I was coming," she answered, brushing the non-existent residue from her clothes. "Let's get out of here." Both of the boys nodded in agreement. When they turned for the door, however, Venom was crouched atop an examination table. The cloud of black slime that seemed to follow it everywhere was crawling back into its body from every crack and crevice of the wall behind it. Its long tongue lolled over the side of its mouth, revealing its teeth again. "Come on, man," Spider-Man said with a sigh. "You don't have to do this." Venom snarled at them in response. Natasha didn't like the way it was starting to lean forward and quietly reached for her gun. Venom launched itself off the table at the three of them, forcing them to hit the deck. She tumbled onto the floor and shot into it, causing it to turn into a writhing black mass. She rolled around the table and dashed for the door, pulling Clint along behind her. Closed doors blurred past her peripheral vision as she followed Spider-Man down a hallway full of offices. She could hear Venom behind them, crashing into the walls and growling angrily. Spider-Man threw himself from the wall and into a door, and they came bursting out onto the street. They were just in time to see the Green Goblin take off in his helicopter, just a shadow in the cloudy sky. Clint cursed under his breath, and then jumped as Venom crashed loudly into the door behind him. They backed off as the police moved in on it. "We need to get back to the helicarrier," Natasha said, breathing heavily. "And can you guys go without me?" Spider-Man asked. "I've got to get back home, schoolwork and all that." We usually do," Clint reminded him. "Get out of here." And that's the end of that chapter. That was fine. We are 23 minutes into this episode and we just read one chapter. Jesus. So, the fact that, though that's actually relevant because this was only part of the chapter. And again, I told you there was an entire third at least of the chapter that was just straight up missing and cut out because I guess I edited over it and didn't copy and paste it on here before I did that. But my biggest issue is that this chapter could be a lot more concise, not just to make it shorter, but in general, it just feels like it takes too long for the characters to do literally anything. Like, the characters have to take the time, they walk down a hallway, Venom closes the door, they have to discuss at length Venom closing the door and how they can circumvent it. They then climb up on top of another container. They open a thing. Natasha has to take the time to analyze it. They pause so a character can ask her what she's doing. Then she asks a question. And it's just get to the point. And there are parts where the conversation makes sense. Like Natasha asking Spider-Man how the buttons work so that she doesn't fuck anything up and get them trapped totally makes sense. That should be there. But the long stretches of conversation where they go back and forth talking about certain things could definitely be shortened somehow. That also means cutting out some of the jokey bits and the quips, but you can find a way to streamline that stuff and keep the one-liners. Like the part where Spider-Man grabs Clint and is like, well, hold on, Merida, we're going up. That's funny. That's a joke. And it makes sense with the scene that is happening. So it doesn't hold you up in the space of doing something else, But it is what it is, So let's move on to chapter 3. Tell me you got the brick. Clint frowned. Sorry, sir, the Green Goblin got away. She heard Director Fury sigh behind the receiver. All right, maybe Stark will have something. I'm sending Coulson down with damage control. We'll report back to the helicarrier. No, there's something else I need you two for, since you're already in the right part of town. We've gotten word of a disturbance at Fogwell's gym. The last thing we need is more of these guys running around, so take care of it before whoever it is can get involved with whatever's going on. Yes, sir, he said, and then Fury ended the call. Fogwell's gym, Clint muttered as he scrolled through his messages quickly. That place has been closed for years. Oh, Agent Sitwell has your phone, by the way. She nodded. Good. Think it's just squatters? Not if it warrants the word disturbance, it's not. Come on, he said, waving her down the sidewalk behind him. We'll get a car. The place was only 2 blocks away, on the corner of the street and bordered by 2 wide alleys filled with random junk. What? Why do they need a car to walk 2 blocks down the street? I know city blocks are long. Trust me, I have walked city blocks. But they're not that long. That's like me saying, come on guys, we'll catch the bus to go from Market Street to Walnut Street in Philadelphia. Why would you just walk? It's not that far, Number 2, Fogwell's gym would not be 2 blocks away from Oscorp. Now, this is due to the fact that in the video game, of course, the map of Manhattan Island is very, very compressed. So a lot of the real life space between different places is basically kicked out. But Oscorp is, I think, if I'm remembering correctly from a newer version of Lego Story, is in Midtown. I think it's on 6th Avenue at 45th and 46th or 46th and 47th. So it's really not that far from Times Square and stuff like that. I think 47th Street is actually Broadway, so probably not that one. I think. Don't quote me on that, and I'm not stopping to look it up. But Fogwell's gym is in Hell's Kitchen. Now, Hell's Kitchen is close to Midtown, very close, but it's still not, I'll get a car, let's go 2 blocks distance, I'm pretty sure. I don't even know if they're actually that close in the game. So I feel like this is a slight discrepancy, and you can't look it up because Fogwell's isn't a real place and neither is Oscorp, but still, it's a little bit weird. The brick facade had faded to gray over the years, just like the boards nailed over the windows. The old sign over the door rattled as the wind blew by, and then again as the ground gave a shake. Clint and Natasha looked at each other. Who do you think it is? He asked. Could be another creepy crawly from Oscorp, she guessed. If only, someone said back. They both looked up and found Jean Grey hovering above the roof in what looked like a glimmering purple bubble. Oh, who is it then? Clint asked her. The Blob, she answered. Fred Dukes is his real name. She floated down through the air, the bubble dissipating just before she touched the top step in front of the door. Surprised to see you two here. This is more up our alley. We've got a situation going on, Natasha told her. Fury wants us to take care of it before he could join in. She raised an eyebrow. Join in? Natasha nodded. Abomination, Sandman, Doc Ock, it's getting bigger by the minute. We better take care of this quickly then. She turned toward the door and held her hands out in front of it. The hinges started to glow as the nails were pulled out. When it fell to the ground, it kicked up a visible cloud of dust. Clint and Natasha drew their weapons before following her inside. So, I think it's worth noting, number one, regarding the Fogwell sting before, this was written before Daredevil was a thing. When I played LEGO Marvel Superheroes, I had no idea what the heck Fogwell's gym was or what it tied into. So I was just like, this is just a place that exists in the comics, all right. And I may have looked it up once and it kind of just flew over my head. So that's part of the reason why I never really registered any of this and like where it would actually be in relation to Oscorp, let alone where it would be at all. Number 2, this chapter is based off of a Deadpool mission from the game, which are basically side missions that you play so you can get red bricks. So, like I said, Clint and Natasha literally are doing side missions while the actual plot is happening in this, which is hilarious, especially because they literally just came from doing an actual level in the game. And then they immediately go on a side mission to keep them busy until the next part of the plot happens off screen. It's kind of ridiculous. Number 3, is Natasha allowed to tell Jean all of this? This is a more cartoony-ish version of the story, so it's debatable whether this matters or not, but it is weird that I seem not to realize that S.H.I.E.L.D. is like a government agency and they don't really just let, like, information fly like this. Like, you can't walk up to one of the X-Men and be like, so today at work, like, no, you gotta keep it mum unless you have permission to talk about it, you know? Interesting. Like, I'm just wondering, they keep just telling people about stuff. But anyway. The interior of the building was just as aged as the outside. The floorboards creaked under their feet, and everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Cobwebs strung themselves up in the corners and over the junk that was lying on the floor. A faded old poster hung on the wall, advertising a boxing match from days past. The only thing that seemed out of place was the giant hole in the middle of the floor. "So this is his new hideout," Jean said. "Logan's been looking for this place for ages." There was a rumble from below the floor at the sound of her voice. Is there anything we should know about this guy before we go in?" Clint asked. Jean tilted her head in thought. "Well, for one, his body mass repels most projectile weapons, so the guns are unnecessary if they shoot bullets." Natasha and Clint looked at each other before holstering their weapons again. "Huh. That kind of leaves me out of the fold, doesn't it?" Clint said. "Not exactly," Jean said with a shrug. "Okay then," he said, pulling his quiver off his back to check the arrowheads. "Hit me. What else can we use?" "Concentrated energy attacks, psionic weapons, psychic manipulations." Natasha shook her head. Yeah, not exactly. "Again, more up our alley, but that's not all. Adamantium and vibranium can cut him, and he's vulnerable to burns." She wiggled her fingers. "Now that's more our speed." Jean clapped her hands together. "All right then. Hopefully we won't need them. Let's go." Jesus Christ. So do you see what I mean about the characters having like back and forth conversations about everything? Clint asks what he's strong against and what he isn't. And Jean could have just explained right there that projectiles don't really work against him. He's more vulnerable to psychic and other non-corporeal type of whatever, like more natural words. But she could have just explained all of that in one like paragraph and then like added the bit about adamantium and vibranium after Clint makes a comment, you know? You didn't have to have a whole back and forth of, oh, well, you can't use this. And he's like, well, I can't use this. And she's like, it's not exactly. And he's like, well, what can I use? And she's like, this, and then this, and this, and just say what it is all together. Natasha gave a start as Jean used her telekinesis to lift all 3 of them into the air, and then they floated down into the hole. A single work lamp provided the only source of light in the place besides what little sunlight filtered down through the ceiling. It revealed tattered sheets and blankets pushed up against the walls, ammunition missing their guns, and some machinery. "What are those doing here?" Clint asked with a lowered voice. Natasha flicked her wrists and the edges of her gauntlets lit up with white lights. She inspected the machines more closely. Unplugged wires lay scattered across the stained concrete floor, connected to monitoring machines and empty broken glass tanks. "Are you sure we're not dealing with one of the Goblin's cronies?" she asked. "The Oscorp logo is all over this stuff." Jean and Clint joined her over near the corner. "As far as I know, he's only worked with Magneto," Jean told him. "Wait, this says AIM on it," Natasha said as she looked over a generator. She looked up to Clint. "Who is that?" He bit his lip and looked down and thought, "A private think tank owned by Aldrich Killian. I'm not sure what they deal in exactly. Definitely don't know if it had anything to do with actual tanks. Why does he just know that? I'm starting to wonder if he wasn't alone, Jean said. Though I wouldn't take him as the kind of guy you'd want to look over your science experiments. Looks like Director Fury was right to be concerned. Natasha nodded in agreement, but then I have to ask, who else was here and where did they go? What's it to you? Oh boy. All three of them froze at the sound of the voice. What are you doing in my house? Fred, Jean started, getting to her feet. We can make this really quick if you cooperate. And how is that? He asked in an amused tone. Tell us who you're working for. He let out a laugh as he stepped into the thin light coming from the ceiling. He was huge, vertically as well as horizontally, his shadow blocking out the light from the floor. I thought you were supposed to be smart, he said. Jean narrowed her eyes. The blob works alone. Well then, would the blob like to explain why he has Oscorp equipment in his house? Natasha asked. Because these aren't things you can just go and pick up at the store. That's none of your business. I beg to differ, she countered. Dukes crossed his arm over his chest. Look here, girl, he said, taking a step forward. I already told you, I'm not working for no one. That means I don't have to answer to no one, including you. Clint got up, but Natasha grabbed his wrist before he could think about stepping forward. Besides, what happens after I answer your questions, huh? Natasha's jaw tightened. No one's gonna. I heard what you said upstairs. He wants us to take care of it. What's that mean then? You gonna chain me up and take me to the raft? I'm not down. Oh, he's not down. We aren't here to arrest you, Jean said. Then why are you here? Please tell me why you've decided to break into my house. Enlighten me. Oh my god, I can't. Enlighten me. Oh my god. Okay, look. Clint shook Natasha's hand free and took a step toward him. She and Jean glanced at each other nervously. For one, this is not your house. It's an old rundown building you're holed up in. And two, we can't even arrest you because as far as we know, you haven't done anything yet. Now, if you want to keep it that way, I suggest you answer the question. Dukes glared at him. What are you going to do, little man? He goaded. Natasha stood and grabbed Clint by the arm. Easy. You think I'm afraid of S.H.I.E.L.D.? You sure seem afraid of going to the raft, Clint shot back. I ain't afraid of the raft, he scoffed. It's not like I'd be there that long anyway. What? You want to take me away? All right then. He started walking toward them, and they all readied their weapons. He came at a run, stopped just short of them, and then slammed his fists into the ground. The concrete cracked, and then they fell through the floor. She could hear the equipment falling around them with metallic clangs. Jean stopped them all before they could hit anything solid and started to bring them back up, but then the blob came and just sat down over the hole. Try and arrest me now, assholes! His muffled voice yelled down at them, followed by laughter. Wow. Clint cursed under his breath. Sorry. Tempers, Jean said. It's not your fault. It was never going to be easy. You having fun down there? Shut up! Jean calmed herself down with an exhalation. Anyway, let's figure out about getting out of here. They started to descend downwards in the dark. I have no clue where we are, though. They came to a stop once their feet unexpectedly touched solid ground. Natasha heard Clint unsheath and fire an arrow. There was a yelp from far off above them. Clint! Natasha hissed. It was worth it, he grumbled. Can you hit the lights? She nodded, even though he couldn't see her, and flicked her wrists. All right, so the bits of conversation leading up to the blob showing up, that was a little bit long-winded, but I actually didn't mind it because at least it was entertaining. See, I think if you are going to have that much, like, dialogue and conversation in your scene, in this type of work anyway, it needs to be entertaining. When the lights came on, they only showed a few feet in front of her, and all she could see was broken machinery. She picked up a piece of broken plastic with the AIM logo on it and handed it to Clint. Hold on to this, for Fury. She got a piece of shattered glass engraved with the Oscorp logo and gave it to him as well. You know what? I think what bothers me about Clint just randomly knowing what AIM is number one, the explanation for it is that I came up with this idea that Clint and Natasha would have specific areas of expertise that they would know about, which is fine on its own, but Clint's area of expertise was like science stuff, while Natasha's area was magic. And I was like, that seems a little bit weird and kind of playing in the sexist tropes. Why can't Natasha know science? But I get that it is what it is now, I guess. It's not really clear in this that Clint knows more about this and she knows more about that because we don't get to see a lot of magic shit. Not before the story ends, anyway. But here. The other thing is that this AIM thing comes back literally in the next chapter. Why couldn't they just go, oh, I don't know, file it away, and then show the evidence to Tony later? Or they meet another SHIELD agent at the place that they go next chapter, as you'll see in the next episode. Why didn't they just give it to him? He passes it on to Tony, and then Tony says, oh yeah, this, and this. And then it just so happens that this also, and then it would have all connected anyway. Like, I don't see the point of just giving Clint this random information that for all intents and purposes he shouldn't even know. It's just weird. But anyway, where are we? Clint asked. It was impossible to tell on sight alone due to the limited reach of her light source, so Natasha shushed him so she could take in their surroundings. The air smelled of metal and their voices echoed unevenly off the walls. The ground she was standing on felt hard, like concrete, and when she listened she could hear water off somewhere. I think we're in the storm drains, she deduced. She's good, Jean said. I know, Clint said back. That means we gotta head toward the river, whichever way that is from here. Well, there's only 2 ways to go in right now, Natasha declared. Yeah, but which way? We were only a block or 2 away from it when we were above ground, but in what direction? Wait. Jean went quiet as her eyes rolled back in her head, and then the blob started mouthing off above them again. Natasha could just hear him yelling, "Get out of my head!" In a moment she seemed to come back. This way, she said, leading them in the right direction. Watch out for the rubble. Okay, see, what we just read is a perfect example of overuse of dialogue. It's definitely here on purpose, I feel like. It's not just characters talking through it. Like, the whole point is that these 2 can't figure it out. So Jean's like, wait, let me try. But it's just taking up space, you know? Right after Clint said, whichever way that is from here, Jean could have been like, oh, let me try. And then she did the thing with the blob. End of the scene. There you go. You didn't have to do the whole like back and forth with Clint and Natasha, and then Jean is like, oh wait, yeah, I'm psychic. It felt strange to walk around in the dark like that. They were practically blind, only following the sound of Jean's footsteps in front of them. The air became wetter the longer they went along, though, and soon they emerged in a cross-section between their tunnel and another larger one. There was a dim light coming from a wall lamp that illuminated the stream of water flowing through the tunnel, perpendicular to the one they were standing in. This makes things a lot easier, Natasha remarked. From that point on, they just had to follow the water. I think it's raining, Clint said. There was a steady stream of water coming from a pipe on the opposite wall, which led down from an inlet on the street. It was last time I looked, Jean agreed. Let's go. Just as she predicted, this tunnel was the one that eventually led them back outside. Once they left the reach of that one light, they were blinded again, and this time forced to perch precariously on a ledge along the curved wall just wide enough for them to stand on. In the end, Jean decided to skip the hassle and float along above the water beside them. This is ridiculous, Clint claimed at one point, nearly slipping off the edge. Luckily, Jean caught his hand. They're not exactly meant to have people on them, Jean said with a giggle. I know, he said as she helped him back up, and that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous, actually, because people do have to go into the storm drains, like public service workers, to do storm drain related things. By the time they reached the mouth of the tunnel, it was pouring. The clouds were thick enough that it didn't have to be sundown for it to be as dark as it was. Huge bolts of lightning flashed across the sky, and the storm whipped waves into the river as it crashed into the rock below them. It didn't look this bad when we left Oscorp, Clint said as thunder rumbled above them. Agents Romanoff and Barton, please report. They heard over their earpieces. Go ahead, Coulson, Natasha answered. We've been trying to reach you two for half an hour, he told them after letting out a sigh of relief. Where are you? We found the car outside of Fogwell's. About that, Clint started. We kinda got stuck in the storm drain system. What? It's a long story, but we found our way out. We shouldn't be that far away. Please tell me you got that guy, he said. We've got Dukes, or at least we're trying to. Clint let out his own sigh. I can see your locations now. I'll send someone to come get you. We've got another situation underway. It could be big. Big? Natasha repeated. Very big. I'd tell you, but I don't want to say anything without confirmation. Clint and Natasha gave each other a look. We'll talk later. On that note, I'd better get back to the mansion, Jean said. You sure you guys are okay? Clint nodded, and then she took off. What do you think he meant by big? He asked Natasha as they climbed out of the large pipe. The rain soaked them immediately. They emerged on a rocky ledge separated by a strip of greenery from the highway. The Horizon Lab stood shadowy on a hill above the streets. I don't know, she said with a shake of the head, but I don't like the sound of it. And that's the end of that chapter. So, this chapter felt like a detour, and not every chapter is going to be like plot, you know? And this chapter actually does introduce something important that helps them figure things out later. but it just doesn't feel like something we should be seeing right now. Not when, you'll see when next episode, when we read about what is happening that Coulson was just saying it's big, but I don't want to say yet, you'll be like, why are we here? It just doesn't feel like this is what we should be focusing on right now. I feel like I'm watching two characters in a B plot in a TV show, and the A plot is just non existent. For what it was, though, this chapter wasn't bad. I would say that I think I enjoyed this chapter the most of all of the chapters that we've read so far. It still has a lot of the same problems as the other chapters that we've read, specifically this episode, the other chapter that we read, but it manages to be entertaining despite that, and that's pretty good. So next episode, we will pick up with chapter 4, which is another marathon chapter, I'm pretty sure. So I will see you for that. If you like this episode, like it on the YouTubes, subscribe to the channel so you'll be alerted when this episode comes out if you're here before this episode comes out. You can also go and watch other things. You can listen to last episode and catch up on what's been going on, or listen to some other episodes from this podcast, or watch anything else that's there that piques your interest. And like I said, I will see you for next episode. Bye.